Well, let's start a podcast then. Hello and welcome to Learning the Law, a podcast about all things legal with a focus on current events where we try to teach you things in 1 hour. My name is Ashley, aka Phoenix Nymphy, and my co-host, who is the man of the hour, my husband, Ron. This podcast is purely educational and should not be taken as legal advice. This podcast does not create an attorney-client relationship. This podcast is based on his interpretation of relevant law. Any opinions expressed are the opinions of the individual making them and do not reflect the opinions of any firm, company, or other individuals. Ron is a licensed practicing attorney in the state of California.
Yes, I am. And have been since September of 1999.
Okay. This week, the podcast is sponsored by NordVPN. With more than 10 years of experience, NordVPN is a leading VPN provider. NordVPN gives you military-grade protection online, and you can access all your favorite sites without restriction. NordVPN never logs your activity when using their servers. You can always trust your privacy to NordVPN. Thank you, NordVPN, for sponsoring Learning the Law. If you use our link, you can have access to all this and help out the podcast as well.
Yes, thank you. Okay.
Yay, we now have sponsors for the podcast. Very cool. It's the first week of sponsors. So exciting news. Today, Ron went and got casted for his first prosthetic.
Yes, I'm so happy.
So exciting. Next week we go back and we'll have a fitting, and if it fits well, we'll start trying to walk on it and start PT and all that stuff. Like, it's finally happening.
Yeah, I'm sick of this chair.
I know you are, babe. I know you are. But it's really exciting. I'm excited. It's gonna be tough road to get used to walking on the leg, but yeah, it's going to be great. So, we actually had a couple of questions and a couple of topics sent to us the last couple of weeks. We were out last week because I apologize for our not being consistent in the last couple of months. I'm dealing with some serious medical issues, and I have a doctor's appointment next Wednesday, so hopefully that will help, get things back to normal. But our first thing is from Troublemancer. She sent me a tweet, and the tweet is talking about in Missouri. Missouri's death toll is artificially lower because a coroner is excluding COVID-19 from the death certificates if the families request it. Now, Ron went and looked this up because she wanted to know if this was legal. And the answer is yes.
Yes.
So
it's in the coroner's discretion to put down the cause of death in that particular area of the law. From state to state, it could vary.
Right.
But while it's ethically gray and reprehensible at times, there have been some privacy issues because some death certificates are public, and a coroner has been requested by the family of the deceased person not to put certain things on the death certificate. And from what I know, this started back in the 80s with HIV and AIDS. So the coroner would put down pneumonia or, something like that. In this case, they'll put down something like complications from influenza or heart attack or, that kind
It just
of thing.
feels really wrong. That I understand why that feels illegal, because it's not really true.
It's not true, but it's not necessarily false if there's a medical reason that they could put it on there,
I guess.
however tangential it can be.
So, but that's definitely a state by state situation.
Yeah, and I didn't find any states where it's specifically prohibited.
Can you put your microphone a little bit closer to your mouth?
Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
didn't find any states where it was specifically prohibited. But in this particular county, from this particular corner, you're talking 12 deaths.
Mm,
So, did it artificially deflate the number? Yes. Was it significant? You tell me if 12 deaths
right.
changed that number significantly. Now, I don't know if any other coroners in that state also did the same thing.
But this
They
was
could have.
specifically about this particular area.
Yeah.
Now, my next question is like, why would the family not want to admit that they died from COVID-19?
That's a good question.
If that's what they died from, why would you specifically request not to put that on there? Like, that's what they died from. That doesn't make sense to me.
Other than they are somebody who's possibly been so vocal about it being a hoax that they didn't want the ridicule that would come from their relatives dying of something that they have been espousing falsehoods about.
I would, you know what?
Because, the deceased person doesn't care,
Right. The deceased person is dead.
right?
But like, your pride is so important. There's got to be something else.
I mean,
That's
if you think about
childish.
this,
That's childish.
during his presidency, Trump's brother died. Did we ever get a cause? Not that I'm aware of.
I don't even
I
remember hearing about his brother dying.
Yeah,
I really was not paying attention.
I have my suspicions on what he died of,
Right.
COVID-19, but
Yeah.
don't know that. And Trump could have said, "Don't put it on his death certificate." I haven't seen the death certificate, so that's a speculation.
So to answer trouble to your question, yeah, it's legal. It's ethically gray and it's morally questionable.
Yeah.
So the next thing is from Estarzi. She sent us a video which does a really good job at explaining. So some stuff has come out. This was back in 2014 is when this started.
Yes.
The West Coast Coalition, which is basically they're just trying to make computers and stuff more energy efficient. And so, but a lot of people are claiming that the United States is banning gaming PCs, and it's not.
No,
and
it's not.
The video she sent us is really good. It's very wordy. So I will just kind of, I'll let Ron talk about it a little bit.
Okay, basically what they're doing is requiring certain parameters for the computers, and they're doing it over years in different stages. It just so happened I think it was 2019, the latest stage.
Yeah, they had 2 stages, and the final stage is what they're in right now.
Yeah, so you need a power supply of a certain wattage.
Yeah.
It needs to be made in a certain way. Is that banning? No. Is it the US banning? No, this is specifically California. California has its own gas formula that they have to follow. California has its own set
It's not
of.
just California. It's California, Washington, Oregon, Hawaii, and also Vermont.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
That's why they call it the West Coast Coalition. And then Vermont's like, I'm going to tag along with this. So these certain states want specific parameters for more to make things more energy efficient. And specifically when the computer goes into sleep mode so that it doesn't drain so much energy, because what it's causing is issues with the actual grid. It's just adding more. It's just to kind of help rein in some of that energy consumption that the more powerful computers can have. If you build your own computer, this doesn't affect you in any way, shape, or form. It affects you if you are buying pre-made computers from Dell, Gateway, stuff like that.
If you read the parameters and everything, the more powerful computers are actually the ones that are more energy efficient.
Yes. So, and most of them now are being made more energy efficient anyway.
Yeah. It's generally the smaller, cheaper computers that are not made according to any energy efficient codes.
Yeah. It's
that
really
are
not affecting. It's really not affecting that much because like they started this back in 2014. So the companies have already started changing over how they do their energy efficiency and stuff like that. So the United States is not banning gaming PCs.
Right. And if it was so onerous, California has Silicon Valley, and all of those companies would have been up in arms.
Right.
About this. You didn't hear anything from them.
So anyway, thank you so much for those topics, Starzy and Troublemancer. It was really interesting doing research on those things. I hadn't even heard the thing about the banning about the gaming PC, so that was actually really, really interesting to learn about. But
and it may lead to people making more of their own computers.
Yeah, I mean,
that's not a bad thing.
No,
you'll spend about half the money.
So on to the topic of the week. We are getting towards the end of our deep dive on the First Amendment. The First Amendment, as you know, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting, the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So, a topic that I saw right before the podcast that I wanted to kind of bring up, which I think will kind of wrap into what we're talking about. The Texas Supreme Court just okayed they're allowing for the arrest of the Democrats who won't show up to legislature. So for those of you who are unaware, Texas is trying to pass voter suppression laws, and the Democrats of Texas left Texas because the governor is calling a special session. The Democrats said, no, we're not going to participate in this. So they actually left the state. And if you are not in the state, they can't have the special session. Well,
they need a quorum.
They need a quorum. So not having the problem is if the Democrats were there, even with them voting against it, it would still pass because there's not enough people that would vote against the voter suppression laws. And yes, let me emphasize, these are voter suppression laws that Texas is trying to pass. So that is why the Democrats from Texas have left the state. A lot of southern states are actually passing voter suppression laws right now.
Not just the South.
So the reason why I bring it up is because, in my opinion, that sounds like they're kind of petition. It's kind of like a redress of grievances or even a protest, if you will. And now they're saying now Texas Supreme Court, which is all Republican, is like, no, they're going to get arrested. That feels illegal to me. So that's why I brought that up. I'm curious from your perspective or from your knowledge and your understanding, could that be considered illegal for them to be arrested because they are essentially protesting this law that the government wants to pass?
Now, do we know on what basis they can be arrested?
It's in the article. I have to go through it again because I read it like 2 hours ago.
I'm reading it right now.
They're saying that they are undermining. They're undermining their constitution and avoiding doing the job they were elected to do.
If I call in sick to work, I shouldn't be able to be arrested because I'm not doing the job that I was hired to do.
Compelling the attendance of absent members by the House is a quintessential legislative act. The state's motion read, adding that the hasty order ignores this fundamental principle. The state also argued that the House Democrats' claims are quintessential political questions that lie beyond a court's power to decide, which I agree. The House rules allow for present members to compel the odd attendance of missing lawmakers, and at least 41 other states have similar provisions in their constitutions, the motion read.
Apparently, they're leaving the state.
Yeah. So
broke a Texas law.
Yeah, they are. So the law is if they're in the state, they have to be compelled. But if they're not in the states, they don't have to be compelled.
Right. So as I'm looking at this, their arrest can only happen in Texas. So if they go back to the state, they get. It's perfectly legal for them to be arrested and compelled to attend.
Right, but they have to go back to the state. So that means that Washington, D.C. state, because I think what they're trying to do is get them expedited back to Texas. But D.C. police, which is where they all went, has to arrest them. But they have no reason to arrest them.
D.C. police can ignore arresting them because the law that they broke was exiting the state. And they can only be compelled once they're in the state. They can't be compelled if they're out of state.
Well, but the thing is, they didn't break the law leaving the state either. That was put into place after they left the state. So when they left the state, that
law was passed after they left the state?
According to the way I'm reading it, yeah. The way I'm reading it, it wasn't illegal for them to leave the state. Like it was like a loophole. Like nothing was ever determined. Like just if you are in the state, you have to attend. But if you are out of state, it's okay. You don't have to, they can't make you attend.
I was reading an article from the Texas Tribune where they basically said that they broke the law by leaving.
Oh, well, maybe I misinterpreted that.
And there was a lower court order that froze the arrest mandate. But the high court, their Supreme Court overturned it.
So
that should make for an interesting case.
Yeah.
Because now if I was a Texas Democrat, I wouldn't go back.
Nope. I would definitely stay out of state and do my work out of state.
Yep.
So That's I think that actually kind of falls under your First Amendment right. Because you still have rights as well as a legislator. And if
Yeah,
this
I mean, you
like
don't give them up.
right. So that's going to be an interesting that's how I would play it. I would say this is my First Amendment right to leave and protest this because I don't agree with it.
Essentially, the GOP is pissed because the Democrats found a way to stop them.
Right. That's all it is.
Now, when the next legislature gets voted in Texas, maybe they'll change those rules. Depends how many Republicans get elected in.
Who knows with Texas? But I do know that they're kind of shooting themselves in the foot with everything that they're doing right now. So, but anyway, moving on. You wanted to specifically address so we've so far we've addressed on the establishment of religion and prohibiting the free exercise of religion, which was two parts. We talked about the freedom of speech, which was two parts. Now we need to talk about, you wanted to specifically talk about the press itself, which we sort of talked about in the freedom of speech, but we talked about the freedom of speech based off of individuals, not the press, which I would have, right. If I'd realized you wanted to separate it like that, I would have kept it under the freedom of speech section. So that's
the reason I separated it like that is because the amendment separates it.
Right. But like, we're all over the place when we're talking about the First Amendment. So like, we're not. Anyway. So we're talking specifically today about the freedom of speech for the press, because the rules are a bit different when it comes to the press and journalists, etc., versus individuals.
Right. And early in the country's history, you had what were known as the Alien and Sedition Acts. And you couldn't publish or even, you could speak or publish anything that criticized Congress or the president. It was a crime. Now, not the vice president, just Congress and the president. And so those lasted quite a while. Eventually, they were gotten rid of. But yeah, you could be thrown in jail despite the First Amendment if you said anything bad about Congress or the president. And that lasted basically until the Civil War. And then in the Civil War, you have Abraham Lincoln made it illegal to conduct correspondence with the other side. And numerous journalists were thrown in jail because they were able to cross lines and get stories back and forth. There were
wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
What? That's kind of cool.
Yeah, there were 4 specific newspapers: the New York Daily News, the Journal of Commerce, the Daybook, and the New York Freeman Journal that were indicted by a grand jury for encouraging the rebels by expressions of sympathy and agreement with what they were going through.
Just because they were writing about. Wow. Okay. Wow. Okay.
They were not able to get out of prison until their sentences were up.
Wow. That's crazy.
So, well, you're thinking that we have a free press. It hasn't always been true, and it's not necessarily true now.
It has its limitations.
Yeah. Same thing, World War I. You had the Espionage Act of 1917 and the Sedition Act of 1918 And if you published anything disloyal, profane, or abusive about the form of government of the U.S. or the Constitution of the United States, it was a $10,000 fine and up to 20 years imprisonment. And the Supreme Court actually upheld the laws because they were saying there was a clear and present danger. And
Really?
yeah, and that stayed into effect until 1969.
What?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, if your story was a clear and present danger in the view of the government and you're writing about the government, they could throw you in jail. And
I,
in yeah,
wow. Okay.
that case was Schenck versus the United States. People can look it up. And then Brandenburg v. Ohio in 1969 revised that standard from clear and present danger to imminent lawless action.
What does that even mean?
Imminent lawless action, that means while we have a freedom of the press, you can't go out and say, we need to have a riot right now. Gather up everybody, get your guns, and we'll march on the Capitol.
Oh, okay.
You
That's
would
fair.
be thrown in jail for that.
I think that's fair.
You know. But yeah, it has to be imminent,
Like, let's do this now. Like, we need to
Right.
do this now. Gotcha.
Right. Let's see. And then 1972, you had the freedom of the press described as a fundamental personal right, not confined to newspapers or periodicals. The Chief Justice, it was restated from 1938, where the Chief Justice defined the press as every sort of publication which affords a vehicle of information and opinion. So it's not just newspapers. It can be the internet. It can be this podcast. And, the right has been extended to newspapers, books, plays, movies, video games, magazines. So that is why uh, the internet is as free as it is, at least
Not really
from
anymore.
our point. No, that's because you got private companies running it.
Well, yeah. The FCC.
And well, the FCC is a government.
Right,
thing,
but private
but-
entities run the FCC, not the government. I'm sorry.
Well, private entities kind of run the government anyway.
Yeah. Anyway, did you put what you're talking about? I don't see on the. I'm trying to follow along, and I don't
I know
see
because
it.
I had a doctor's appointment, so I wasn't able to.
Oh,
But we
okay.
will get to
The stuff that.
the New York Times versus Sullivan.
Okay. So, all right, back up a little bit. So,
Okay.
can you? Okay, what were you saying about the? What did you just say? So they expanded the press from newspapers to media, essentially,
Yes.
in 72.
Movies, TV in 72.
Okay. As long as it didn't promote an immediate danger.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay. Now, everybody probably knows that various celebrities have been suing tabloids for years for libel and slander. Okay. And the standard for this goes back to a case called New York Times versus Sullivan,
Okay.
where a police commissioner sued the New York Times for defamation as a result of some civil rights acts and the story about him in Alabama. And
Can you explain what defamation is for people who may not know what defamation actually
yeah.
is?
Defamation, or to defame, is putting somebody in a bad light, which causes you to have bad or negative opinions about them.
And what is the difference between slander and libel?
Okay. Slander is verbal and libel is printed.
So usually when it comes to media, it is going to be libel that they're talking about.
Yeah.
Even what if you're like on a news broadcast and you speak it? That's still libel, or would that be slander?
That would be you could bring that under either, but it would probably be libel.
Okay.
Because you are quote unquote publishing particular news story.
Slander is more, we're just kind of talking and we say something and someone hears it and maybe happens to record us talking a crap about somebody, and then they can.
Yeah, they don't have to record it. They can just hear it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So.
And this particular sheriff got $500,000 damages.
Because they were showing him in a poor light based off of what was happening in the civil rights.
Right. And the mistreatment of civil rights protesters.
Mm-hmm. Was it true?
No, some of the things were false.
Oh, okay. And they were able to prove it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the Supreme Court of Alabama affirmed the $500,000 damages and then went to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court comes back with a 9-0 unanimous decision holding that Alabama courts violated the First Amendment.
What? Oh, for the press?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so basically what came out of this is what I said here. A plaintiff, somebody who sues in a defamation lawsuit, libel or slander, and that person is a public official, such as the sheriff was here, or a person running for public office, not only must prove the normal elements, publication of a false statement to a third party, for example, you have to prove that the statement was made with actual malice. And what that means is the defendant had to know the statement was false or recklessly disregarded whether or not it was true.
So, say you accidentally. So that's for people who post what they think is true, but they're not intention. They're just publishing what they know or what they think they found out.
Right. In this case, this particular case, so they got the number of times that Dr. King was arrested wrong.
Okay.
Did they know the statement was false? No. They went with what they could find out.
Gotcha. So I have another question on that. What about, let's bring it to current day stuff. What about QAnon or any of those Republican GOP websites that post the deliberately wrong and illegal, you know what I'm talking about? Could that not be?
And that's why Dominion Voting Systems is suing Giuliani and some Republicans for $1 billion and some other websites.
Because they are deliberately lying. They deliberately lied because they wanted it, because it didn't fit their narrative.
Correct. And they know it's false.
Right.
And that fits under actual malice.
Okay. Interesting.
Now, later on in the early 80s, you had this put to the test. with Jerry Falwell and Larry Flint.
When was the New York Times versus Sullivan lawsuit?
64.
64. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Now, Larry Flint publishes a porno mag called Hustler, and in that porno mag, he put in an advertisement about Campari whiskey. I believe it's a whiskey, but that's the name of the liquor. And in the ad, the original ads that ran in regular magazines would talk about the first time that this person ever had Campari, and how great it was. Now, this parody ad showed Jerry Falwell reminiscing about his first time with Campari and quoted him as saying, "We were drunk off of our God-fearing asses on Campari, and mom looked better than a Baptist with $100 donation."
Gross. So gross.
That is the part I will say. I went on to other more
Gross
detailed things.
Yeah.
And at the bottom of the ad, it did say ad parody, not to be taken seriously. Well, Falwell got a hold of this. And
I wonder how he did.
Well,
Sorry.
He probably had a free subscription from Larry. Larry was famous for sending everybody in Congress a free subscription.
Wow.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, so he sued for $45 million. And he said that this was actual malice. That they knew that they weren't, that those statements were false. And, I've been damaged from this. And the Supreme Court ruled against him.
As much as I don't want to say this, Larry Flint really pushed the boundaries for the media.
Yeah, he did.
I mean, he's the reason why why there are so many laws for the media for stuff like this. And it's a terrible way in which it happened, but it needed to happen.
It's always the people that are on the fringes.
Yeah, that's true.
That paved the way.
Because that's just disgusting. But whatever.
So, and basically what the Supreme Court said was, while a bad motive may be deemed controlling for other purposes in other areas of law, the First Amendment prohibits you getting any money from this because it's parody. A reasonable person is going to know that this is not true.
Especially when they say this is a parody. This is not true.
Right. So, yeah, ad parody, not to be taken seriously. That was the quote. Had that quote not been in there, it may not have been.
It may not have ended up the way
result.
It ended up.
Right.
Interesting. Okay.
And so that protect a lot of comedians.
Yeah.
Who would, make fun and false statements about politicians and other celebrities. And so that was another step in the press becoming a freer press than what we had before.
Wild.
Yeah. Then in 1970, I know we're bouncing around the years, but there was another case, Greenbelt v. Bresler, where they said a news organization couldn't be sued over the use of rhetorical hyperbole. And this was one of these cases where some newscaster, I believe, went on to say that, millions of people are being hurt, or that kind of thing. That's hyperbole. He doesn't know the exact number. He doesn't know that it's millions.
Oh, right. Rhetorical hyperbole. Basically, an exaggeration.
Right. Um, and so they said that it wasn't libel because if you're going to punish that, you'd be subverting the fundamental meaning of a free press. And basically, you should know hyperbole when you hear it.
Right.
So a lot of these things come down to you actually have to think about what's being presented to you.
It requires a lot of critical thinking, which unfortunately is something that people lack in this day and age, which
Yeah.
is how you get the QAnon stuff, because they're not actually thinking critically on, like, does this, for example, is the US banning PC? Is the United, are we banning gaming PCs?
Gaming PCs.
Like,
Yeah.
my first thought when I was like looking into that was, why would California ban gaming PCs, knowing that the heart of the tech industry is in California?
Right.
Like, they use powerful PCs. Why would they ban them?
And
That's
we're in
called critical
California.
thinking. That's called critical thinking. That's like,
I won't say the name of my computer, but it's my favorite brand of computer. They're coming out with an entire new line of gaming computers.
cool.
They wouldn't do that if they were banned in California. I mean, banned in the US.
But like, that's how critical thinking comes into play. Like, you hear something and you go, what? And then you go listen, you go look for it. Even no matter how convincing it sounds, just because it might play into, because I mean, we've all been subject to clickbait. I mean, who was it that I forget who it was that we were listening to. It might have been John Oliver. But like, people complain about bad clickbait, but what they don't realize is everything is clickbait. You just don't see the good clickbait. You don't pay attention to the good clickbait, right? That's what headlines have always been, is clickbait. You just,
if it bleeds, it leads.
Right. Like, so yes, that's cool. Read it, but sometimes, especially when things are too good to be true, I like to delve into it. And when it comes to political stuff, I will never take anything at first glance. I will do my research into it, because I refuse, whether it's Republican, Democrat, Green, Independent, I'm going to look at the full thing, because you're never going to get, when it comes to opinions, political stuff, anything like that, you're never going to get the full story. You need to look at, and you need to pay attention to these media outlets that are actually legitimate and have been around for a long time. I know that like the GOP has a hard on to get rid of CNN, and are like, CNN is not a great source. CNN actually is a legitimate source to get your news from.
Yeah. On the political spectrum, they're a little left of center.
They're definitely more left of center than others, but like, Fox News is so far right, it goes left sometimes. They're a legitimate news source though, but they shouldn't be your only news source. Just like MSNBC shouldn't be your only news source. Like, we get the paper every weekend. We read the freaking paper every weekend. So like, you need to expand where you get your news sources so that you get a better understanding of everything. Because no matter how unbiased the news source is, even if you like NPR and PBS, there's still going to be a little bit of bias, because people are human.
Right. And you shouldn't just parrot something you heard on talk radio or the internet.
You need to understand it. Like, so that's why critical thinking is so important. And one of the biggest things when it comes to critical thinking is getting more resources. That's why when you're in school and they say you need like 5 resources for your research paper, yeah, you should continue doing that for your real life. That's actually a very valuable thing that I didn't appreciate until I got older and realized, yeah, I'm not writing research papers anymore, but I'm still want to be knowledgeable for things that I'm interested in. And anyway,
Right.
moving on.
People should make up their own minds. Okay.
Critical thinking is important. So please don't just, and when we like to give you the resources that we find on this podcast, don't just take our podcast and that be your source. Do your own research too.
Right. Exactly. We can't possibly delve into these topics in an hour.
Right.
In the detail that they need to be looked at.
I mean, Ron went to school for this content, right? Like, you go, like, if you really want to understand it, you got to go to school for it. So we're just here trying to explain it to a point where you're not just completely lost. Because it is very intimidating to look at laws and go, and it's very easy to get confused.
Oh, yeah.
So moving on from the rhetorical hyperbole.
This brings us to basically the most recent big freedom of the press case, and that was Obsidian versus Cox in 2014. And there was a blogger named Crystal Cox, and she accused Obsidian Finance Group and its president, Kevin Padrick, of corrupt and fraudulent conduct. They, of course, sued Cox. And for the first time, the Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit, the Supreme Court, did not take the case. So they let the Ninth Circuit ruling stand. And the Ninth Circuit said a blogger is entitled to the same free speech protection as a journalist.
What? Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
They cannot be liable for defamation unless the blogger acted negligently. Both journalists and bloggers are equally protected under the First Amendment.
Well, a lot of journalists do now blog. Like, that's now a very common way to get your information out.
Right. Protections of the First Amendment do not turn on whether the defendant was a trained journalist.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Now, and it says here that her allegations were actually opinion. They were not accurate.
Right.
Now, my question is, is any of it true?
I found one post to be more factual. And therefore, if you, I'll back up a minute. In order to defame somebody and win at a libel or slander, you have to present it as facts. It cannot be presented as opinion.
So her blog post was more opinion based. Okay, again, and that kind of comes to the critical thinking aspect of stuff. Again, like, this is this is subjective, but that's kind of when critical thinking is taught in school, like, you can learn what the difference is.
Right. And that's why the press will have an opinion section.
Yeah.
It's labeled opinion. They can go on there and say, Joe Schmo is corrupt and needs to be arrested.
Right.
You know, and they can't be sued for it. If they put that on the front page and then it's presented as a fact, And they
Oh,
probably could
because
be
of the
sued.
way newspapers work.
Right.
But like when it comes to blog posts, you gotta again think critically. I use that phrase a lot, and I'm gonna continue to use that phrase a lot. Critical thinking is very important, and it is a habit that can be learned. It is something that can be learned.
Right.
What if the editorial section is front page, is what chat asks, what Roxy asks. I think as long as it says editorial.
Right. As long as it says editorial, or the story says this is the opinion of the journalist and not of the papers, or not presented as fact, then
good question.
Yeah.
Very good question. Yeah.
And I will give an example. Fox News. If you look at Tucker Carlson's show, that is an opinion show.
Do they state that it's an opinion show?
They do not.
Okay.
They do not state it's an opinion show. People
but
do
they
take it
present
as fact.
I mean, they present it as factual.
But they present no facts.
This is
They
true.
present what Tucker Carlson thinks.
This is very true. Yes.
For an hour. Help us all.
This is very true.
But yeah, he doesn't present any facts.
He brings topics and then he gives his opinion on the topic.
Right.
But he never actually explains the facts of the topics. Holy crap, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, and there's a number of shows on Fox News Channel like that. And the reason that they are not been sued is because that's their defense.
This is opinion.
This is opinion. What facts did I bring?
Wow. I hate to say it, but that's brilliant. I hate to say it. God, I hate that so much.
Now, MSNBC has a number of shows like that as well.
Oh, absolutely.
But, you would think that John Oliver would be sued. He presents facts.
He brings facts.
He does.
Oh, that's one of the best shows, in my opinion.
And when you can bring the facts and back them up.
Rachel Maddow as well, Roxy. Rachel Maddow is the same. She does the same thing, but I am not.
So did Keith Olbermann when he was there.
I am not the biggest fan of Rachel Maddow. Woo, unpopular opinion, but she does the same stuff that Tucker Carlson does. Some things that she says, I'm like, oh yeah, that's actually a valid statement. I agree. But overall in her show, yeah, she does the same thing. It's just her opinion. Do I agree with some of her? I agree with her a lot more than I agree with Tucker Carlson. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It's not just Republicans. It's also the Democrats who do it. And we are here to call out everyone.
I just couldn't remember her name.
Yeah.
Keith Olbermann, who was also on MSNBC, was the same type of person.
Mm-hmm.
He got fired, I think, but he's not there anymore. I can't think of the CNN guy that does the same kind of thing. There
is one on CNN as well. I think every major news. Hey, you can calm down. We're still podcasting. We're almost done. I think every major news article has a group like that. But aside from MSNBC and Fox News, even the CNN, PBS, NPR. NPR and PBS are where I get most of my news. They will have their opinion people, but they also have their factual stuff. ABC, I think actually does pretty decently. Local news channels, they will present facts.
Yeah,
CNN, yes, CNN is
I
very
read
careful with it.
AP releases, Reuters.
Yes. I mean, surprisingly, I really like LA Times here in California, and back home, the AJC,
The Atlanta Journal-Constitution.
the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Y'all, I know that sounds surprising, but the AJC is a really good newspaper. It's a really good newspaper.
That being said, I will say that the Orange County Register is a good newspaper. It is on the right of center
Yeah.
spectrum, but it is a good newspaper. They don't publish opinions except in the opinion section, which I tend to not look at their opinions much. But if you want good journal stories, based on facts, the Register's good.
Yeah. And it's funny because I've actually moved back to a lot of newspaper stuff for that reason. I'd rather have good investigative journalism and take time to read the story later than to get the most recent updates. And CNN is the one who started that 24-hour news session.
Yeah. Don't necessarily think that was for the better, but that's me.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that one.
Now, in the prior administration, you had the Washington Press Corps. Certain members were not allowed in. They would get their license, their press confidentials. That's not what I'm looking for. Their press passes would be revoked if they went against the administration too much. Was this a violation of the free press?
So illegal.
You would think so, but they did not restrict. From my understanding, they did not restrict the organization.
Oh, that's right. I remember that argument. They didn't restrict the organization, just the person, just that journalist.
Right. So the organization would have to send someone else. And they were in their right to do that. They could not restrict the organization from sending somebody unless there was some kind of security reason for it.
They just kept removing people from those organizations, which is just,
yeah.
I mean, that's such a loophole. That's a loophole right there.
Right. And, when you have a press conference, it's up to the discretion of the press secretary who to call on for questions and who not to.
Well, yeah.
So
that I understand, but like flat out denying people from coming in, that is illegal, sort of. That's so messed
so
up.
You have a free press, but do you have a right to ask a question at the press conference? No.
Right. You can be there. I mean, you're still hearing, you're still there, writing on that particular stuff. Wow, yeah, you were right. I was thinking this would be our last episode for this miniseries, but it is not, because we still have to do peaceably to a simple and the petition to government for redress of grievances. So
yeah. That will be one episode.
We will be back next week for that. Yeah, that's it for the podcast. Do you have any closing statements?
Other than people need to research on their own and come up with their own opinions. Don't just parrot what you hear somebody else say.
I'd like to add on to that. Make sure that your resources are legitimate resources, because it is very easy to find any website out there that's going to tell you that your opinion is correct. Make sure that your websites that you are reading, your papers, anything that you were reading, make sure that these are legitimate, credible resources. Because if they are not credible resources, it's very easy to fall into those echo chambers. And it's on both spectrums. It's not just Republican, it's also Democrat. Like, I find Huffington Post to be one of the worst sites to get my information from. It's very hit or miss, and it is very left. I am not a fan of Huffington Post, personally speaking, but when we say credible, we mean resource. We mean journalists, one that have length, time that they've been around is very important. The Times, the USA Today, New York Times, Washington Post, LA Times. Those are all very good resources. PBS, NPR, but there's also CNN. There's also places where is a website? You know what?
When you think of what you're hearing or what you're reading, think about whether it is an opinion or it is a fact. If it's a fact, they will have some kind of statement to back it up.
Right. You know how in Wikipedia, you've got all of those resources that they found their information from? Your news site's going to have that too. Your news is going to have that stuff too. And if it continues to post similar content, if they're resources, I mean, it is very much like when you're doing a research paper. They will have their resources there for them. So,
and I think that about covers it.
I will post a link from Forbes magazine, which everybody knows is a good, is a credible. Oh yeah, BBC. That's another one that I read and listen to. They have a lot of really good, credible.
Yeah, I like BBC America.
They have a good start for credible news sources if you are looking for some credible news sources. And we will make sure to put those in the podcast show notes so that you can get access to that, which will be on the website at twolazydogs.site. More importantly, verify. This is what Rock just said. Verify your resources and also look for resources with opposing. Yes. Thank you. Verify. That's the word I was looking for. Verify your resources and also look for resources with opposing views to eliminate personal bias. Absolutely. That's how I like to look up my information. And that's how you learn critical thinking, is reading the opposing view. Absolutely.
Not just reading it, you got to understand it.
Yes, absolutely.
If you disagree with it, if you don't understand the opposing point of view, you will not put together a credible argument against it.
Right. And that's coming from a lawyer. So, with that, thank you so much for listening to Learning the Law. If you like this podcast and want to hear more, don't forget to like, subscribe, follow, and share in all your favorite places. You can find it hosted live on Twitch at twitch.tv/PhoenixNymphy every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Pacific. Use the hashtag Learning the Law on social media to follow in more places. You can find Ron on Twitter at NecroKijo. That's NecroKijo. And me on social media, on any social media at Phoenix Nymphy. If you have any questions, please tweet, comment, or email us at twolazydogsmedia@gmail.com. This has been a Two Lazy Dogs production.
Bye, everyone. Don't forget NordVPN for your VPN needs.